I did want to make sure I covered this. Whoops, it is. Oh, guys, make sure to double tap that screen and like the video, guys, and subscribe.
Handed down too.
And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, guys. But once again, make sure to support the stream with a super chat or a gift.
Yes, two key decisions on presidential power and the firing of people from government agencies. Justice has ruled that.
Oh, yeah, and shout out to my man Kingan for sending a thumbs up and also for sending 100 for 2 jewels. Did it about like 4 or 5 times. Appreciate that.
President Trump does not have the constitutional authority to fire Lisa Cook, a governor from the Federal Reserve Board.
But the court backed the president's power to terminate Rebecca.
Because I'm be real with you, the Federal Reserve was always supposed to stay outside of the power of the president. I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not supposed to be controlled by the president, and that's just the sad reality of the Federal Reserve. And it's not controlled by the president. The people is honestly completely unaccountable, which is why it needs to be removed. But that's a whole other debate. But yeah, there's a reason why the Supreme Court won't allow him to touch nobody in the Fed, because it's supposed to remain outside of the government, well, the president's control. But the FTC commissioner, oh yeah, that's well within my man's jurisdiction, so he can get her up out of here.
Federal agencies that are considered independent. It overturns 90 years of precedent. CNN Chief Legal Affairs Correspondent Paula Reed is right outside the Supreme Court. So Paula, walk us through the significance of these decisions today.
Pamela, these are such incredibly significant decisions. In many ways, these will be some of the defining opinions of the Roberts Court, because they get to this question that has been hanging over the second Trump term, which is, are there any limits to his ability to fire federal officials? And here they give us some insight. While President Trump and his lawyers believe in something called a unitary executive theory, and that the executives should be able to fire anyone they want, any way they want, here the justices put a few limits on that. In the one case, they ruled, and it's a really interesting group that was in this majority opinion. It's Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, and the 3 liberals all ruled that he cannot fire an official in the Federal Reserve without going through a process, giving that individual an opportunity to respond, that there are some limits on his power when it comes to firing officials at that agency. Now, that is one that...
Okay, it hinges on Trump firing of Lisa Cook, ruling Cook can stay on the job while she challenges firing. So, AKA, damn. I mean, not every job you can challenge a firing. God bless you got one like that. Presidents are required to show case before firing Fed leadership. Yeah, because, like, let's be real. The Fed is supposed to be able to operate somewhat outside of the government. I mean, that's why once Trump pretty much picks a Fed, he can't fire that guy for the next 10 years. It's like, that goes to show how much power the Fed low-key got outside of our government system. Because think about it, nobody can really check them. I mean, the Treasury can't check them. I mean, the executive branch, legislative branch can't really check them. It's like, you know, it is a bit of a concerning thing that we got with the Fed. I ain't gonna lie.
Has, of course, always been recognized as being independent of the White House. But in a separate case, when it comes to an employee at the Federal Trade Commission, that he does have the power to fire that individual because that is within the executive branch. And again, this is a significant decision because it's sort of drawing out the contours of the extent of his power to try to reshape the federal government through these mass firings. Now, President Trump wasn't clear how he was going to react to these decisions, and it's been a pretty mixed day for him overall at the court, but he described this as, quote, a big win.
I want to bring in our chief Supreme Court analyst, Joan Biskupic, right now. Joan, like Pamela, Paula, you were inside the court when these decisions came down. Give us a little sense of how that felt.
Sure, Wolf. It's good to see you. The most important thing the justices did today was in the case involving Rebecca Slaughter of the Federal Trade Commission. Chief Justice John Roberts and the conservative majority used that decision to roll back nearly a century of legal policy about the president's power to remove the heads of regulatory agencies. Now, in some ways, this is going to sound kind of dry and arcane, but regulatory agencies are so important for how Americans live their lives. They cover rules for, medical, health, nuclear power. In this case, it's the Federal Trade Commission that was at issue. And we're talking about, safeguarding consumer practices, antitrust issues. So that gives you a sense of all that's at stake. But this court, for many, many years, has really not appreciated the congressional power to set these up and set up independent heads that the president can only remove for what's called for cause. That would be if somebody was actually found guilty of some sort of malfeasance or ineffectiveness in office. And that's what happened to Rebecca Slaughter. She was an appointee who had many more years left on her term, but President Trump, when he came into office, said he wanted to remove her. He wanted the power to do that. And the Supreme Court has used that case to say, yes, President Trump can remove Rebecca Slaughter, even though her term's not up, a Democratic appointee, and he can do that at the multitude of other independent agencies that at one point.
Within our government, underneath these branches of our government, he can. And the FTC falls under that. So does the FCC. But you know what doesn't fall under that? The Fed. Because it's supposed to be able to operate outside of the executive branch, judicial branch, and the legislative. I mean, even the legislative barely has any control over the Fed. Let's be real.
As I said, Congress had set up to be.
Oh, my bad, the judicial. Because, I mean, look at the Supreme Court. They're able to kind of dictate. Honestly, not even really dictate. They kind of just solidified. And what I've always been saying about the Fed, that nobody can really check these guys. Not even the president can fire somebody on there. Like, they're, tooth and nail pulling on that one. It's like, well, you got to have a damn good reason. I mean, like, bro, he's supposed to be running this damn country. I mean, why can't he have a say-so on who's in the Fed? And I wouldn't be mad if this was Obama, Biden. I really don't care. I do feel like the president should have a say in that. Like left, right, don't matter.
Independent, to not be under the pressure of the president. That was a 6-3 decision. And after the chief, who has had a special project here in trying to give the president much more robust power to not just hire people, but to fire. Justice Sotomayor then read her dissent from the bench, and she said, this can go in one of two directions. This can give, it can give the president.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next subject with this one.
Across the country. Wolf.
All right, Joan Piskupic, thank you very, very much, Paula.
I want to go over to Paula Reed now because there was another big ruling today where justices rejected a Republican challenge to a Mississippi law that allows the counting of some mail-in ballots days after Election Day. So it's certainly a blow to President Trump and his efforts, Paula, to reduce mail-in voting ahead of the midterm elections.
That's exactly right. And Pamela, I really do think this is one of the biggest cases of the term. And it's notable that it came out against the Trump administration because they've been arguing that if the law says that the election has to be held the Tuesday after the first Monday in November, ballots cannot be counted if they come in after that. And this was sort of a test case. If they were able to succeed here and limit those ballots from being counted, it was expected that they could potentially go on to challenge other forms of voting, not exactly on Election Day, in-person voting, those kinds of things. So it's notable here that they lost, and the state of Mississippi, which does allow the counting of mail-in ballots, if they arrive after Election Day, as long as they are postmarked by Election Day, that state won, because this is something that is also done in roughly a dozen other states. So this is a really significant case because we were watching this closely to see if the Trump administration prevailed in this case, where else could they try?
I mean, goddamn, after Election Day, hold on, mail-in ballots after Election Day. I mean, it is what it is, but that just sounds sus. I mean, it doesn't really, like, why are we counting votes that coming in after Election Day? You know what? People have their situations, so I understand. But I can see why they'd want to get rid of that. I can definitely see why.
To go to limit those voting opportunities. So this is a significant loss for the Trump Justice Department.
There was also something else that happened.
Considering that Trump used mail-in ballots himself, it's a pretty hard argument for MAGA to kind of go with. Like, oh, we should have took that out. You know, as much as I agree with you, some people do need it. There's people who actually do need it. And after election, even after Election Day is a bit wild, though. Like, why after Election Day? I'm not going to say there's a underlining duplicitous reason that we can substantiate, but hey, it is weird.
The High Court this morning, the Supreme Court declining to hear President Trump's appeal in the E. Jean Carroll sexual abuse case. So what does this mean for the president?
Well, this means that the one of two E. Jean Carroll cases is over, right? There were two verdicts people will remember for defamation, and one of the cases involved alleged sexual assault. The verdict that came out for $5 million has now been upheld. It's over. Donald Trump has to pay E. Jean Carroll $5 million because the Supreme Court declined to take the case. They had actually postponed their decision whether they would take it or not for something like 13 or 14 or 15 times. And then today they said, we are not taking the case. Not surprising. It doesn't have a real constitutional dimension. Really Therefore, the lower court ruling and the verdict, the $5 million.
It was civil court. You're asking them to overturn a civil. All right, come on, Trump. Go to appeal or something. But like civil court, and you're trying to make the Supreme Court handle this, I'd see why they'd turn it down. It's like, dog, this wasn't even done in criminal court. Maybe criminal court, they'd take it on, but civil court, no.
$1 million verdict stands. Donald Trump has to pay that to E. Jean Carroll. We still don't know what's going to happen with the other case, which resulted in the $80 million verdict. That's still going through the appeals process. But Donald Trump does now have to, like it or not, he has to cut a check to E. Jean Carroll. There's nothing he can do about it.
We have had quite a number of announcements in just the past hour. I want to turn first, though, to perhaps the biggest one, which is the court's decision on the Federal Reserve and Lisa Cook, certainly one of the biggest ones. So what we have here is SCOTUS rejecting President Donald Trump's attempt to immediately fire Lisa Cook, but in a separate ruling, actually expanding the president's power to fire officials, overturning here nearly a century-old precedent. So, look, Ankush, Lisa Cook aside here, is this in essence an expansion of the president's powers?
Oh, yes, this is an extraordinary expansion of the president's powers. And I would flip the order of how
honestly, they're kind of framing it wrong. Honestly, just an establishment of the president's power. They're not really expanding anything because, like I said, the Fed has always been able to operate outside of the executive branch. Because think about it, I mean, he couldn't fire Powell even if he wanted to. Like, once you put the Fed in, he's there for 10 years. And even if the president wants him gone, he cannot get the Fed chair gone. That should let you know how much the Fed can operate outside of the executive branch and other branches as well. So, like, let's be real. We knew that was going to be a ruling. Well, at least I did. Now, the FCC, I mean, or the FTC, that absolutely makes sense. I'm be honest with you, it really does.
Think about these cases. I would start with the case involving the Federal Trade Commissioner, because that basically stands now for the proposition that a 90-year-old case that allowed for independent agencies to be created by Congress has been overruled. And the president now has wide-ranging power, it seems, to fire appointees of these what were supposed to be independent bodies at will. And so this was how the American regulatory state has been structured for many, many years. Republicans and conservatives have wanted to overturn that structure for decades. So this is a major, major victory for the Republican Party, their policy agenda, their anti-regulatory agenda, and conservative legal activists. The Lisa Cook case represents what I would describe as an exception to that extraordinarily broad power that they've now given Trump. But it's a narrow exception. It appears to apply just to the Federal Reserve. The Supreme Court conservatives claim that this distinction is based on the history of the Constitution. I don't find that credible. I think this was largely driven by policy considerations and the extreme chaos.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and move on here. Let's get to this Warfront video. Does Iran own the Strait of Hormuz? Let's go ahead and get right into it. Shout out to Warfronts. And guys, make sure to double tap that screen, like the video, guys. And if you're feeling the channel, man, go ahead and subscribe to it. Also, any question, comment, jokes, or disagreements, I'll be happy to read out loud. And of course, post it to the top of the screen. Just send in a super chat, Rumble Rant, or Venmo, guys. All right, back to it.
The tricky thing about